From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
So we'll say hello to Connor Riley here, Kroger Fresh Take with him. A lot to get into. I want to pick up on the Manning conversation, though, before we move on. I guess, Connor, let me start with my prediction. I made this, I think, pretty clearly the last few days here. I do believe that Arch Manning is going to Georgia. Nothing from the published reports involving him yesterday really changes my mind about that. Recruits say what they say. For the most part, they say good things about every school that's kind of in the race for their services, if nothing else, for no other reason than just simply being polite. But through process of elimination, I think you sort of see Georgia as the last man standing here. Alabama going after Eli Holstein. Florida, LSU not really getting involved here in any significant way. Ole Miss never really getting involved, certainly not as much as I thought they probably would at one point in time. It's kind of down to Georgia and Texas, and I think a smart person, given the choice between the two, ain't taking Texas right now, bad grammar, intentional. So my prediction is that Manning's going to Georgia. Let me let you respond to that, and then we'll talk about some of the stuff that's out there over the course of the last 24 hours.
Yeah, so I'm not quite sure I'm ready to join you just yet on the Manning is going to Georgia train. I will note, and you're obviously going to touch on this a little bit later in your show, Dylan Raiola, the number one quarterback in the 2024 recruiting rankings, he commits to Ohio State last night. It had kind of been trending that way. And when you look at some of the other guys that Georgia has targeted in this recruiting cycle, they're now in an Arch Manning or bust cycle. And I think not just for this 2023 recruiting cycle, but for the 2024 one as well. And obviously they have more time to make up things in the 2024, and guys can obviously emerge between now and the 2024 national signing period. But they have so clearly staked themselves in this Arch Manning sweepstakes to, this is going to be a thing where if they miss, which I still think is a possibility, and I think even you would likely admit that there as well, while you do think that Georgia is going to get Manning, you could see a world where he ends up going to Texas for whatever misguided reason that might ultimately be. I think we're both in agreement on that. If you miss on him, the quarterback position becomes somehow even more interesting than it has been at Georgia for the past however many years that Kirby Smart has been there, because you're really 3-4 years out and you're looking at your quarterback future plan. Now, Stetson Bennett has shown that all can get blown to bits and your best laid plans never end up coming to fruition. But I think when it comes to Arch Manning and where things stand with him right now, and the Dylan Raiola domino falling, so to speak, yesterday, it's now very clearly Georgia has put all of their eggs in this Arch Manning basket, and they'll find a talented quarterback out there, whether it be the portal years from now or even in this 2023 recruiting class. But with what we've seen from Arch, with Alabama sort of, I think, like you've pointed out, taking themselves out of it, it's Georgia and Texas for Arch Manning. And if Georgia doesn't get Arch Manning, I'm going to be really interested to sort of see where that leaves Georgia in terms of its quarterback recruiting.
So I agree with the premise that you're establishing there. I agree with your reasoning. However, I guess I don't really view the Raiola story as a story very connected to UGA, because it seems like had he not gone to Ohio State, and there had been a lot of predictions to Ohio State for a while, it seems like that next team there was USC. I mean, clearly Georgia fans wanted Dylan Raiola because you'd always want the best quarterback in any given cycle. So Raiola was popular with UGA fans, but unless you know more than I do, I don't see all that much evidence that UGA was all that popular with Raiola. So him choosing Ohio State, I don't think that's kind of like an example of, well, I guess Georgia's got all of its eggs in Arch Manning now, even though I kind of agree with where you're coming from on that. I don't know that Georgia was making all that many inroads with Raiola. Am I getting that wrong by saying it that way?
I don't know. I sort of judge these kind of things by how often is Jeff Sentell writing about these guys. I think Jeff does a very good job of laying the breadcrumbs, so to speak, of who guys Georgia's really in on and who they aren't. And he had written about Dylan Raiola a couple of times here. Now, he had, I think, been trending away from Georgia for a good bit. And I think that's because in my understanding and the reading of the green in this, and I could certainly be wrong here, I think Georgia decided they would rather pursue and go after the Arch Manning bird in the basket. So then waiting out this Dylan Raiola, because you do point out, Ohio State wanted him, USC wanted him. There's a lot more variables that were in play when it came to Raiola. Whereas with Manning, 2-3 months ago, I think we all sort of figured Texas, Alabama, Georgia, those were the sort of three big teams. And now it looks like Alabama is taking themselves out of that race. So really, if you're Georgia, you're really competing with two teams. And quite frankly, Georgia should beat out Texas at this point in the stage for a recruit like Arch Manning, given the success that Texas has had in recent years and the success that Georgia has had.
Do you take seriously the possibility that Arch Manning could still be uncommitted in August?
I do, because, for a guy who doesn't do a lot of media, granted, him doing media with our friend Sam Spiegelman the other day, good on Sam for getting that. We know a lot about Arch Manning for a guy who doesn't, talk a whole lot, doesn't have social media, isn't, throwing things out there. I could definitely see a world where, and because this has been an unconventional recruitment from almost the beginning, him taking this maybe even somehow all the way up to signing day, as he mentioned there in the quote a few minutes ago, after the season. I do think it'll be interesting to see how the visits go, and specifically if he takes official visits to Georgia and to Texas during the month of June. Now, obviously, the Mannings have money, and the difference between an official and an unofficial visit isn't all that germane to the Manning family there. So I do think that, I could see it, but I've always sort of been under the belief it's going to take his visits in June. Whether it gets to Florida or LSU, I think those are largely inconsequential. And I think my target timeline had always sort of been July. I think that's when he wanted to make his decision and decide what he was ultimately going to do. Because
you mentioned Jeff Sentell a moment ago, I'm always reminded of what Manning's high school coach told Jeff about Arch, about him wanting kind of like a 1970s style recruitment. Now, you can insert your own joke about that, of course, but I take that to mean, hey, he wants as drama-free a process as possible. Not committing before the season starts and taking it to December, that's not what that would be. A name as big as Manning, who's going to bring a lot of mainstream fans into the recruiting process, a guy like that making his announcement in December, that's ratcheting up the drama. That's not turning down the drama. And so to hear Arch acknowledge within the last 24 hours of, yeah, maybe I might take it all the way to December, that to me is a little bit of an interesting admission. Now, he also leaves the door open to, make a decision at any point in time. He'd make a decision right now, he says, if he wanted to. But the idea that he's even considering playing as an uncommitted prospect in his senior season of high school, taking it down the wire, these teams that he's considering, that to me was an interesting admission, because that, I have to say, is not what I expected to happen. I expected an early summer announcement from Manning and, getting to work on, going to play a senior year, whatever else he wanted to do. But the idea that Manning could play this fall without committing yet, to me, that ratchets up the drama. That doesn't turn it down, and we've been kind of led to believe that's the opposite of what Arch would, I guess, prefer to do, or certainly those close around him would prefer him to.